Ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, I have done it. I have cracked the code. I have made my way to reading Dostoyevsky after a year of struggling to get into his books, I think which was mainly due to the translation, which was, and I know I'm probably throwing shade here, but it was the Pavir and Volokhonsky translation of Crime and Punishment. I attempted to read that just last year and had heard so many good things about it that it is quite possibly the greatest book of all time, up there with the brothers Karamazov and Tolstoy's War and Peace. And I got 65 pages into that translation of Crime and Punishment and just thought that it was like watching paint dry. The language was clunky to me, or the translation was clunky. It just did not allow me to get into the book. And I completely understand that there is a perspective out there that says that the P and V translation is as close to Dostoevsky's Russian and true writing as you could possibly get, and you know what, more power to you. But for me, the goal for me is to get into Dostoevsky, and that translation just did not cut it. But book recommendations and entrance points into complex authors and classic books, they're so tricky because I guess in my experience, if you're going to take something away from this video, it's that the right book to read or the right entry point into a certain author, depending on what your goal is, I guess there's some variation to this, but the right book to read is the one that sort of calls to you and hooks you. But that can be any book. It literally can be any book. And in my case, it was the brothers Karamazov.
Bottom line is,
read a book, people.
Also, beautiful edition of this book. I was in Washington, D.C. visiting my brother. Got a chance to go to a few bookstores, and one of them, called Capitol Hill Books, had a whole Dostoyevsky section, and I saw this there, and I mean, look at that cover. It's just a beautiful cover. It makes you feel like you're there. When you hold it, it's like you're a part of the story. And that is one of my favorite feelings to have when I'm reading something, especially something like this. This is the Modern Library hardcover edition, and it does have illustrations inside as well. I just thought this was such a beautiful book, and even though I had not yet gotten into Dostoyevsky, I just thought this was so beautiful, and it was only $15, which I guess to my understanding now is probably a steal for what this book is in terms of how rare it is on the market, I guess. Within the first, I would say 25 pages, I was hooked with this book. And in those first couple pages, it's basically a montage of the main characters, and Dostoyevsky just whips all of this up into a nice little cocktail, and we get a good glimpse as to what the story is going to be, how the characters interact with one another. I come into this, of course, knowing that it is a murder mystery, family drama, courtroom drama, so I do know a few things, but I've taken very careful measures so that I do not know much else other than that. And I try not to go online and even get help with reading the book to try and kind of decode some of its philosophical messages. And I know that there's a lot of deep discussions that can be had when we read this book, but I have not gone online to get help in that regard. I just kind of want to read it through, and I want to be surprised, and I want to feel all the human emotions that one would feel if they were just going in dark to this book. And so that's exciting to me. The characters are so compelling. Like, first of all, Fyodor Pavlovitch, my gosh, like every scene that he is in, it's like he's the court jester, he's the Joker. And there's just mayhem and chaos every time, something comes out of his mouth. He has no regard. You just put him in there and chaos ensues. He is willing to say anything and do anything to get attention, and he's willing to throw anybody under the bus, including himself. He's got no problem doing that either, but it's more like a manipulative tactic. Like, he has resentment, and one of the chapters that was really powerful that shed light on something that I think is happening today talks about what resentment does and why somebody would want to be resentful. And in the first couple pages, Fyodor Pavlovitch says that it's not pleasure exactly that he gets from resentment and taking offense. Rather, the act leads one to feeling distinguished. Understanding, at least through Dostoyevsky's writing, his thoughts on resentment, I think that it makes a great deal of sense as to why it's so popular. It's a way for the person taking offense to essentially feel superior. They create their own social hierarchy when they take offense, and they place themselves at the top. I mean, wow, what a move. What a great move for you. But I think we see this everywhere in our institutions, specifically at colleges, universities, and I think resentment has built up to a boiling point and possibly has even tipped over. But there are some crazy family dynamics right now going on in the first part of this book, especially with Dmitri and his father, the patriarch of the family, Fyodor. They're both after the same woman, Grushenka, I believe her name was, and I hope I'm pronouncing that right. But at the same time, there are a few other love interests from Dmitri's past that are sort of getting in the way of this, and Dmitri, like just a little 16-year-old boy, has no idea what to do. His emotions are just wild. I think we've all, at whatever age, probably when we were younger, we felt the sort of inner turmoil that Dmitri was feeling in terms of kind of the analysis paralysis that he's in regard to Grushenka, and I think it's Katerina Ivanovna is his other romantic interest. He was interested in Katerina for the wrong reasons. Dostoyevsky describes her as an imperious woman, and she has a commanding presence in the room, and I think that attracted Dmitri. And when he tried to court her, she was like, no, thank you. And that did not go well with Dmitri, and it made him want to pursue her even more. But it seems like Dmitri has moved on to other things, greener pastures, I guess, with this Grushenka woman, who also in the last scene with her and Katerina and Alyosha seems she is smarter than she would have you believe. The power dynamics in that scene where Alyosha is visiting both of the women, they flip like 2 times in that scene where you think one person's in control and all of a sudden they're not. And almost every scene Dostoyevsky writes is packed with these interesting character dynamics. There can also be really nice character building scenes where we get some background and some context as to why characters act as they do, which is really important. But I've noticed that everything that has unfolded in the story thus far, it seems like a natural progression. Something that would have happened to these characters, something that can happen to us, probably have happened to us, which makes a story that much better when you can relate to these characters and connect your own lives to them. I personally find myself connecting so far with Alyosha and maybe just a little bit of Ivan, but mainly Alyosha, because he has, I think, this sort of boyish naivety. I mean, he is quite young. He's the youngest of the 3 brothers. I think he's like 19 or 20. He has this naivety to him and sort of just believes that everything will work out. Very much an optimist, glass half full kind of guy. But he also has a flaw where he has people in his life, like his father, who are willing to harm him and others, and there are other characters who are willing to manipulate just as much to get their own way, and Alyosha is not on the lookout for that. He's just like, oh, everybody is good down deep where it counts, and everything's gonna be fine. The characters that he has been surrounded by are not characters that are going to always have his best interest at heart. I think that he's going to realize somewhere along the way, and they're kind of setting up Dmitri for this, that people most close to him are going to do terrible things. He's not going to be able to, I don't think, throughout the course of this book, be able to maintain his naivety and believe that people are just inherently good all the way through. And in reading about Alyosha and the fact that he does think of people in that way and that no one's really out to get you, I think that he is going to be bitten by that. It's a very good thing to know that there are people out there who will do that and to expect that to happen to you based on who they are. Another interesting thought process that Dostoyevsky was taking me through is that he seems to suggest through Alyosha that the belief in God may not be exactly incompatible with reason. I don't think that he's fleshed that logic out quite yet, but I'm interested to see where he takes that. And then we get to Father Zosima, and Father Zosima, he is like the Obi-Wan Kenobi of the story so far. He's like the wise old man, essentially. And I read something that I had never thought about before when it came to Father Zosima. They were talking about this paper that Ivan had written, talking about the state and the church. Dostoyevsky says, the church believes in the fatherly exhortation of the individual, kind of nudges you along in a fatherly way, like you can do better, you're not all that you could be, essentially. And no matter what somebody has or hasn't done, there is a redeeming quality, a divine spark within you that the church chooses to acknowledge even after you've done something that is, morally reprehensible or against the law or whatever. And some critics say that the church does not like how judgmental the church is. But, what are we comparing the church to? I get that I'm spiraling, but Dostoyevsky makes you think a little bit. So I'm going off script here, and I'm wondering, what exactly do people compare the church to when they say the church is judgmental? Is the church more judgmental than you are to yourself or others? Is the state not judgmental? Are environmentalists not judgmental? I think everybody is judgmental about something. So what are your judgments based on? I think you judge based on the truth and what you believe. So what is the difference between how hard environmentalists or Christians judge themselves or others? Because right now, I really can't think of a difference. So after I had read part one and sort of reflected on a few things, what I came to understand was how harshly you judge yourself or others is correlated with your hierarchy of values and is further influenced by the severity in which a value was violated. So if you or somebody else egregiously violates one of your higher ranking values, your judgment will be severe and vice versa. So I point this out because if anybody says that something like Christianity or environmentalism, whatever, you name it, is too judgmental, I think that it means that the individual places a low ranking on the value that was violated. And I think that makes perfect sense, at least right now, that if you're somebody, for example, who goes to church and they want you to confess that you're a poor, miserable sinner, and you do not value the values of the church, then them wanting you to confess your sins, it's just not gonna have that punch of meaning for you. So you might feel like you're being judged way too harshly. So again, I think that judgment is correlated with your hierarchy of values. And if a higher value is violated, then your judgment will be higher than if a lower value is violated. Anyway, that was one thought I had, kind of a thought spiral after reading the first part. I'm sure that Dostoyevsky will make you do that several times and rethink your value structure. There's another quote that I thought was very insightful. I'll share it with you. It says, I think this was Father Zosima who said this. As for Rome, it was proclaimed a state instead of a church 1,000 years ago. And so the criminal is no longer conscious of being a member of the church and sinks into despair. If he returns to society, often it is with such hatred that society itself instinctively cuts him off. You can judge for yourself how it must end. In many cases, it would seem to be the same with us, but the difference is that besides the established law courts, we have the church too, which always keeps up relations with the criminal as a dear and still precious son. And besides that, there is still preserved, though only in thought, the judgment of the church, which, though no longer existing in practice, is still living as a dream for the future and is, no doubt, instinctively recognized by the criminal in his soul. That is an interesting quote right there. There's a lot to unpack. My initial thought was that it made me wonder why those who elevate compassion to the spot of the highest moral virtue are not more drawn to Christianity, because you would think that the belief that everyone has a divine spark within them, no matter what they have done or didn't do, that would align well with those who are just radically compassionate. The idea that there is always a redemptive quality within somebody, doesn't that require some sort of empathy and compassion or belief that, there's good in everyone and that good should be nurtured and fostered to its fullest potential? You would think that idea from Christianity would just go really well with the compassionate type of person. But obviously something as complex as Christianity, it's not just about compassion or any one thing. So I get it. People are religious for different reasons. And it's interesting. It made me think about what value or values does Christianity provide in general? Like, what does Christianity provide that gives it such a high value among those who practice it? Secular people don't value it because they don't believe in God. But do you need God to exist to recognize the value of the tenets of Christianity? I think this is what Jordan Peterson means when he says he acts as if God exists. I don't think he makes a statement like that if he didn't believe that it is within his best interest to follow the tenets of Christianity regardless of whether God exists or not. Anyway, some interesting questions to explore for sure later on down the road. I think Dostoyevsky will probably talk about those later, or if not, we'll just have to discuss them ourselves. And if you guys did like that kind of detour in discussing the more philosophical aspects of the book, let me know, and I will continue to do so in future videos. But I think that about wraps it up for me for part one. I'm very excited to get into part two. Things are seemingly at a tipping point with Dmitri. Dostoyevsky is setting him up to be the, suspect number one when Fyodor Pavlovitch is murdered. And the interesting thing is, once Fyodor Pavlovitch is murdered, I want to see how all the other characters interact. I mean, there's money involved, there's land involved, there are love interests involved. So I'm excited to see how the characters are going to react and move forward after that event and see where they end up at the end of part 2. If you got any value out of today's video, please like the video and comment down below. Let me know your thoughts. But no spoilers. Keep the spoilers away. And as always, please subscribe to the channel for more content. I look forward to the next video, and we'll see you next time.